What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over every backfield, talking about which running backs I'd be starting and sitting. Before we do that though, have to start things off the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was Calvin Ridley, Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, and Devonta Adams rank 1st through 4th in air yards per game, but who ranks 5th? And the answer is actually Denzel Mims, and no one's gotten that one right yet, but it was a tough one, so not too surprising. But he's getting a ton of air yards recently. Today's stat: what team has the highest pass play percentage so far this season? So there is no Thursday night game this week, so we'll start things off with Sunday games, and that is Jaguars at Vikings. First up, this game has a 52-point over-under, and the Vikings are currently 9.5-point home favorites. This one is the easiest game to break down on the week. We've got Dalvin Cook, James Robinson, always being must starts when they're active. Dalvin Cook is a little banged up, but if he's out there, you are playing him. If he were to miss, then Madison would become a must start, and he needs to be owned in 100% of leagues, especially right now. If Dalvin Cook goes down, Alexander Madison becomes a league winner, so he should be owned everywhere, especially if you have Dalvin Cook. Raiders at Jets is up next. This game has a 47-point total, and the Raiders are 7.5-point road favorites. For the Raiders, Jacobs suffered an ankle injury on Sunday. He's another running back where if he is active, you are playing him, especially in this matchup. The Jets allow a ton of receptions to running backs, and this game script is very likely going to be positive for the Raiders. If Jacobs were to miss the game, though, then Booker would become a low-end running back one. I'm not sure that it's going to feel good putting him into your lineup in that case, but given the matchup, given the reception upside, especially for Booker, he actually has more receiving upside than Jacobs does. If Jacobs is out, Booker is like in that running back 10 to 12 kind of range, and that's, I know, crazy to think about, but I do think Jacobs is going to play. So that's the only scenario if Jacobs is out. You're not playing Booker unless you're probably in like a 14-team league. Maybe you can consider it in like the second flex spot, but in general, not playing Booker if Jacobs is out there, and I do think Jacobs will be out there, but again, got to pay attention to those news. For the Jets, Gore is getting a ton of touches with P. Ryan out with the injury. He has 17 and 21 touches over the last 2 weeks, and he's going to be facing a Raiders defense that ranks 30th in rush defense DVOA while allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Believe it or not, you can play Frank Gore this week only as a flex play. Extremely low upside, but the floor is actually relatively high, so if you got to do it, it's okay. Next up, we have Browns at Titans. This game has a 54-point over-under, and the Titans are 5.5-point home favorites. For the Browns, this is a good spot against I'd say slightly below average Titans run defense. They're not attackable on the ground. We're saying like they're not, the Lions, the Texans, the Packers, not those kinds of teams, but they're definitely not great defending the run. It's worth noting that they're underdogs, which is a projected game script that does favor Hunt over Chubb. The thing is, Chubb now has over 100 rushing yards in 5 of his 6 healthy games this season, and the one time that he didn't, he averaged 6 yards per carry in a 32-point loss in Baltimore. We're not expecting him to go over 100 yards in that matchup. So as long as this game stays relatively close, he's gonna get his touches, and he is a locked-in running back one every week. As for Hunt, he's less locked in, but the touchdown upside is still high, and the receiving role always allows him to do well even when they're losing. So he's more of a low-end 1 to a high-end 2, but that means that the vast majority of you are starting him. And for the Titans, obviously we're starting King Henry. Lions at Bears is up next. This game has a 44-point total, and the Bears are 3-point home favorites, which is a little surprising to me. I know this just means that the teams are evenly matched and the Lions are really bad, but I don't know, this Bears offense is just so bad that I don't see how they can be 3-point favorites in most matches. But anyways, for the Lions, with Swift out, Peterson and Kerryon Johnson got 15 touches each, and all of Peterson's were on the ground, whereas Kerryon Johnson was more of the receiving game back. He had 11 carries and 4 receptions. Peterson was the one to score twice. I believe that he had like 6 carries for 8 yards and 2 touchdowns at one point. He had a few nice runs to start the second half, but for the most part, neither of these running backs was all that good, and hopefully when Swift is able to return, he should resume his role as the featured back. He is so clearly the most talented option for the Lions, and he does make the job of defenses much more difficult. So hopefully they realize that and they feature him when he returns, and hopefully he is able to return this week. Even though it's a tough matchup, being an underdog in Chicago, he can do fine in negative game script, and so if he's back, I consider him a low-end 1 to a high-end 2. If he does miss another week, then both Kerryon and Peterson are fringe plays. Like, you could use him as a second flex option in a deeper format, but I would just prefer to only use Swift if he's back. For the Bears, David Montgomery gets nearly all of the running back touches. He went right back to an 85% snap share in his return, gaining 143 yards on 15 touches, also had that 1 touchdown. And while a lot of his production did come because of the matchup, that's working in his favor again this week. He's a home favorite, and the Lions are a defense that's allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Dave Montgomery is a low-end running back 1 this week with a decently high floor. Just don't expect a 60-yard carry every week. He's going to get there mostly based off volume, which should be there this week. But again, don't expect 150 and a score. Next up, we have Saints at Falcons. This game is a 56-point total, and the Saints are actually 3-point road favorites, which feels a bit generous given who their quarterback is. But anyways, 3-point road favorites. For the Saints, it is extremely unfortunate, but there is actually a discussion that needs to happen here. Kamara has been dreadful with Hill as the quarterback, finishing as running back 22 and 35 over the last 2 weeks with 1 combined reception, which is absolutely absurd. He now faces a Falcons defense that, while the public thinks they're bad, they're a clear pass funnel, ranking 6th in yards per carry allowed, but 31st in yards per pass attempt allowed. And we saw last week that the Saints are more than willing to give Latavius Murray a good chunk of the rushing opportunity. And now he has 2 players, talking about Kamara now, he's got 2 players stealing rushing touchdowns from him. I mean, how often can you say that the Saints would have 4 rushing touchdowns in a game, that Kamara would be healthy, but he wouldn't have any of them? We see Hill get 2 touchdowns last week and Murray also get 2 touchdowns. So there's a very real chance that Kamara finishes with around 15 carries, 1 to 2 receptions, and given the matchup, that really only makes him a mid-range running back 2 this week. As for Murray, we do need to remember that last week his production mostly came off of game script. They went into that game knowing they were going to win, knowing all they had to do was run the ball, not turn it over, not force any mistakes. They didn't need to use Alvin Kamara at all, so they didn't. And when we see games like that where they're dominating, that's when Latavius Murray has more of these touches. If this game against the Falcons is much closer, which it's going to be, then, Murray's not going to have as much opportunity. He's not going to have potentially as many scoring chances, although he did score from farther out in that last game. But the point is, Murray, you can't expect this production every week, so he is more of a flex play, someone that I would prefer not to play because I think it's a little points chasey, but you could play him, and especially as a second flex, deeper format. That's where I'd go after Murray. Wouldn't really do it in most formats. For the Falcons, Gurley was out last week and they won by $1 million, and yet you still didn't even really want any of their running backs. It seemed like Brian Hill was going to be the guy, but they used a massive rotation. And let's be honest, Brian Hill, Ito Smith, these are not good running backs. And so given that if Gurley's out again, it's going to be a rotation. They're going against probably the best run defense in the league. And then even if Gurley comes back, he hasn't been all that good, but he's not scoring. And he's pretty unlikely to score in this matchup. So I would just prefer, no matter what happens, don't play any Falcons running back. Next up, we have Bengals at Dolphins. This game has a pretty low 42-point total, and the Dolphins are 11.5-point home favorites. For the Bengals, this has been a tough year, and things are not getting better post Joe Burrow. They only scored 10 offensive points last week, and it's not going to get any easier traveling to Miami. Bernard is the only running back you can even look at, but he only has touch counts of 12, 13, and 10 over the last 3 weeks. He's gained over 60 total yards in none of those games, has not scored a touchdown. He's a low-end flex play if you have to go there, but I would prefer not to go there. As for the Dolphins, we just need to see who's going to be active. There's a chance that there's so many different combinations of who could be active in this game. We're just going to have to wait and see. I have the same take that I did, I believe, a few weeks ago, is that when all of Breida, Gaskin, Ahmed are healthy, I don't see us really being able to start any of them. If, let's say, Gaskin is back, but Ahmed isn't, well, then I probably would fire up Gaskin in a really nice matchup against the Bengals. If Ahmed's the only one healthy, probably use him. But again, if both those guys are back, I'd want to at least wait 1 week and see what the split looks like, how they look, because I don't think there's enough volume, enough targets total going around in this backfield for a split to occur and for us to still have one of them be viable. Next up, we have Colts at Texans. This game has a 51-point total, and the Colts are 3.5-point road favorites, which honestly feels a little bit low. I talked about this earlier in the week. Losing Fuller, losing Roby, that is not going to be good for this offense, for this defense, and so 3.5 points seems a little bit low. For the Colts, though, we are going to need to see if Jonathan Taylor can return this week. I'd imagine that he will, which means that it's probably going to go back to a committee unless they decide to feature him. But in this matchup, it might actually be worth taking the risk on Taylor or Hines if you have him. The Texans rank 27th in rush defense DVOA. They've given up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. They rank 30th in yards per carry allowed. This is a really, really bad run defense. It's a team that got worse, losing Roby, losing Fuller. The Colts should win this game. The Colts prefer to run the ball. So I view both Taylor and Hines as low-end running back twos, but it's likely one of them will produce better than that. So they're both low-end twos, but if Taylor's getting all this work, he's probably going to finish as a 1. If Hines gets most of the work, he'll probably finish as a 1. So I put both of them there, but one, it's unlikely you have both of them. So really, if you think the one that you have might produce in this game, might get the most touches, it's probably worth playing them because this is a really difficult matchup. And who knows, maybe all of their production does come on the ground and both of these guys crush. I would think Taylor's the most likely, again, if active, to see the most opportunity and to do well, but it could absolutely still be Hines. If Taylor is out, then Wilkins will be viable in the flex, but he would need to be out. I would not be playing Wilkins if both Hines and Taylor are active. For the Texans, Duke is really the only viable running back, but he's just a pretty mediocre flex play. Despite what Derrick Henry did to the Colts last week, they have a solid defense, and Duke hasn't really done all that much as the starter. He had the nice touchdown catch last week, but that was basically all he has done as the starting running back for the Texans, and so I would prefer to find a different option other than Duke. Rams at Cardinals is up next. This game has a 48.5-point total, and the Rams are 3-point road favorites. For the Rams, I know people are excited about Akers after a decent game, but like we went over earlier this week, most of that production came on one long run, and he still only played 27% of the snaps. I want one of these running backs getting at least 60% of the opportunity before I am willing to start any of them. This is a 3 running back committee, and one long run is not going to completely change that. Akers could take over to close the season, but I want to see that happen first before I'm willing to play him in the week before the fantasy playoffs. I'm not going to be doing that. For the Cardinals, the roles of Drake and Edmonds remained the same this last week. They're in close to a 50-50 split, but Drake is getting more of the early down work, with Edmonds getting more of the passing down work. Drake was the one with the big day because he scored the 2 touchdowns, and it's worth noting Drake dominated the red zone touches for the entire team. There were 16 red zone carries and targets available last week, and Drake had 9 of them. That is likely due to the injury to Kyler. I would think they would lean a little bit more pass heavy when they get into the red zone, or Kyler takes some of these carries in the red zone, but they probably wanted to keep him healthy. They didn't want him carrying the ball in the red zone and getting hit. And so I think that had something to do with it. But it's at least interesting to note that they leaned on Drake so heavily. Drake does seem to have slightly more value right now, although the split continues to limit both of them. Like if they are splitting the snaps 50-50, it's only so much upside that one of them can have. And so right now I have Drake low end 2, Edmonds more as a flex play, and I just really wish they would feature one of them, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen without an injury. Next game up, we have Giants at Seahawks. This game has a 48-point total, and the Seahawks are 10-point home favorites. For the Giants, Gallman continues to be their lead back, and he continues to look really good in that role. He now has 6 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks, and he's coming off a 27-touch performance. This week, the matchup is much more difficult, and Seattle actually has a really, really strong run defense that most people don't realize they're that good. Given the volume, though, if you have Gallman, I think at this point you need to consider him locked in as a running back 2 every week. In a great matchup, he can be a 1, but even in a difficult matchup against Seattle, I think he's a 2. He's going to get the touchdowns if they have any. He's going to get receptions. He's going to get fed the ball. So I really think not an ideal setup for a running back, but Gallman's a 2 this week. For Seattle, Carson returns last week finally, and he looked really good. He looked healthy. That touchdown run was phenomenal. It was incredible. He scored that. But he did only play 25 snaps in his return. He gained 41 yards and that touchdown on 8 carries. And then he had 2 receptions for, I believe, 16 or 18 yards. Again, he did look really good, and I would imagine he's going to see increased snap share as he gets more healthy, as he doesn't get injured each week. And so I would think that that's going to come at the expense of Carlos Hyde. We should expect more work this week, and given that he had the 10 touches, maybe he gets up to like 15 to 17 touches. And since he's going to have that receiving upside, he's going to have that touchdown upside, I consider him a low-end 1 because I say 15 to 17, but maybe they look at last week, they say, okay, he's good to go. He does a full week of practice, and in this week, he has 20 touches. That's in his range of outcomes, and because it is, I think you got to have him as a 1. Hyde, he's going to see his snaps go down again. He's not going to see much work in the receiving game. He's going to get some carries, but they're not going to be that valuable, and so he's going to need a touchdown to score, and that's going to make him flex viable, but not someone that you need to be playing. Eagles at Packers is up next. This game is a 47-point total, and the Packers are 9.5-point home favorites. For the Eagles, this is a fantastic spot. The Packers have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs, even allowing David Montgomery to have a good game. Unfortunately, Sanders has seen his snaps and opportunities drop recently. He's down to a 60% snap share these last 2 weeks with touch counts of 19 and 8. It is worth pointing out that he has had really strong touch counts in games that he finishes. So he has 7 healthy games on the season, and he's averaging 14 carries and 2.5 receptions per game, and he is still averaging over 5.5 yards per carry in the season. He had a brutal matchup against one of the best run defenses in football. I mean, Seattle, again, people are going to look at that and say, oh, Seattle's a bad defense. Sanders is playing bad. No, Seattle has a very, very good run defense. It's Seattle, it's the Saints, it's the Bucks. These are defenses that are very, very good at defending running backs, and so we don't love matchups against them. But going into this week, the Packers are one of the best matchups for running backs, and so if there's a week where we're just testing out Miles Sanders, we're saying, hey, is this you? Is this the offense? Is this the matchup? What is it? Well, it's not the matchup this week. It can still be Sanders or the offense, and the feeling is if you watch this offense, they're very, very bad, and so you can only do so well as a running back. But if there was a spot where we're looking at this and saying, can we trust Miles Sanders in the fantasy playoffs? If he has a very bad game against the Packers, and it's not, like 24 to nothing at the end of 1, like if it's even a remotely close game and he has a bad game, then we're starting to consider benching him into the playoffs. But I feel like he's going to have a really good game, and so if you got him, I think you're playing him. For the Packers, another relatively easy breakdown. We're always starting Aaron Jones. Jamal Williams is always viable when they're going to dominate. That's kind of up to you to decide. If you really think the Packers crushed the Eagles in this one, Jamal Williams is not a bad play. But if this game's remotely close, then it's going to be more Aaron Jones than Jamal Williams, and Jamal Williams would be much more of like a fringe flex play who will need a touchdown to pay off. Next up, we have Patriots at Chargers. This game has a 47-point total, and the Patriots are 1-point road favorites. For the Patriots, we continue to have a mess. Damian Harris is getting zero work in the receiving game and can really only be played in positive game scripts, and even then his floor is like 2 to 3 points. James White had 2 touchdowns last week, but it came on 6 touches for 17 yards on 20 total snaps, and so you can't really rely on him. And then you got Sony returning. He played 1 snap, so that's obviously not something you're playing. I don't think Sony should be owned in any leagues, but could Sony see 10 to 15 snaps, and could James White get a few more carries and leaving Harris with like 10 carries on his own and no targets? So I think the floor on all these dudes is so low that unless they're playing basically the Jets right now, I don't trust any of them. If Sony Michel has another game where they just completely don't use him, they're going completely into Damian Harris and James White, then we can come back and talk about that. But right now, I do think they're going to give some work to Sony as he works back from his injury, and so I don't love it. I don't think you should play any of them. For the Chargers, we see Eckler return, and he played 72% of the snaps. He gained 129 yards, 15 touches, 11 receptions. He will be a weekly top 7 running back, regardless of matchup going forward. You need to be playing him. The Sunday night game is Broncos at Chiefs. This game has a 50.5-point total, and the Chiefs are massive 13.5-point home favorites. For the Broncos, this is a horrible spot. The Chiefs defense isn't necessarily elite, but it's really difficult for a running back to succeed as a 2-touchdown road underdog, especially when they're splitting the snaps and they're not getting any targets. And so I would prefer to bench both Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. For the Chiefs, Clyde is pretty clearly the lead back right now, but they're throwing the ball so much, which is smart. I'm not complaining about that. They should throw the ball probably even more, but they're throwing the ball so much that the running backs are not getting a ton of volume. It's a great thing being such a big home favorite, but until they start giving these running backs more volume, Clyde's only running back 2, and no one else is viable. The first Monday night game is Washington at Pittsburgh. This game right now has a 44-point total with the Steelers 10-point home favorites. I'm recording this before the Steelers play the Ravens, so I do not know if something big happened in that game, but if anything does, then I will pin a comment in the description. So for the football team, this is one of the worst spots you can be in, 10-point road underdog against the Steelers. But Gibson has really taken over this backfield in recent weeks. He is the running back 1 overall since week 10 and the running back 5 on the season. You're starting Gibson in any matchup moving forward. And McKissick is more of a desperation play in a deeper full PPR format because his role has definitely been reduced. For the Steelers, my guess for this game that's about to happen, and happened in the past few guys, so we'll see if I'm right, is that Benny Snell will be the lead back. I hope that McFarland sees increased opportunities because, while I don't think they'll ever use him as a feature back, I think he has talent, and I think he has definitely a lot of like big play upside. You know, he can score from anywhere on the field. So I wish they would give him a few more opportunities. I do not know if that's going to happen. Since Connor was tested positive, though, what we saw in that last game is really going to help because Connor is not going to be able to play, at least I believe, not going to be able to play in week 13. And so what we learn in this week 12 game, we can apply it towards this next week. Washington does have a very strong run defense, but they're going to be big home favorites, talking about the Steelers there. And so I would view Snell, assuming he is the lead back in this game, as a decent running back too. And my evaluation on McFarland is going to depend on what they do in the Ravens game. Hopefully, I can pin a comment and say, yay, they used McFarland. Maybe we can use him as a flex. But if they give him like under 10 touches, then it's pretty unlikely we can use him in week 13. The second Monday night game is going to be Bills at 49ers. This game has a 48-point total, and the Bills are 2.5-point road favorites. For the Bills, Moss continues to outsnap Singletary, but this is very similar to the Cardinals. It would be great if one of them were to be featured, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Because of that, and because the 49ers have a pretty decent run defense, I have both of them as being flex viable plays, but neither of these two are must starts. For the 49ers, it's pretty clear that Mostert is the lead back, and I do expect him to see an expanded snap share in his second week back from injury. He should see around 20 touches in this game, and he's going to have a lot of touchdown equity, and I do like him as a high-end running back too that you're probably playing in most weeks moving forward, assuming he stays healthy, and I don't think any other 49ers running back is viable. The final game of the week is Cowboys at Ravens on Tuesday night. There is no line for this game right now because Vegas has absolutely no idea who's going to be active. I can't really give a great breakdown because of that. So you're really just going to have to look at the rankings. But Dobbins and Ingram will be back for that game, assuming they don't catch COVID. And I would expect Dobbins to resume his role as the lead back and be roughly a running back 2 in this matchup with no other Ravens running back really being playable. Then for the Cowboys, if Lamar is out again and if the Cowboys are big favorites, then Zeke's going to be a good play. But if Lamar's back and maybe the Cowboys are underdogs, then Zeke's more of a mid-range running back too. Again, a lot depends on the projected game script here. And since we don't know that right now, or at least I don't know that right now, I'll say running back 2 for Dobbins and Zeke, pending a change if the line gets released and it's drastic in one direction. So that's a breakdown of every backfield in week 13. If you want to see my exact rankings on every player, then you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.